There are phases in life when you feel as though you're climbing a mountain covered in fog. The path isn't clear, the air is thin, and every step feels heavier than the last. No one is beside you. No one is cheering. No one is watching. You walk anyway. Not because someone told you to, but because something deep inside insists that you must keep going. You try, you push, you honor your promise to yourself, even on the days when your spirit feels cracked. And the strangest thing is this: the world around you becomes silent. Not hostile, not unkind, just silent. No one says, "I'm proud of you." No one sees the invisible war you fight every morning before you even get out of bed. No one applauds the moments you choose discipline over despair, hope over numbness, growth over comfort. And that silence can feel like a betrayal. You begin to wonder, does any of this matter if no one witnesses it? But hidden beneath that loneliness is a truth most people never discover. The most important transformations of your life happen away from the noise. Not on the mountaintop, not in the spotlight, not in the presence of applause. They happen in deserted places, within the fog, within the silence, within yourself. Carl Jung once said that every rebirth begins with dissolution. Before the new emerges, the old must fall away. The self you've been must disintegrate, so the self you're meant to become can rise. And dissolution almost always looks like isolation. It looks like people drifting. It looks like conversations losing meaning. It looks like you sitting with your own breath, your own thoughts, your own shadows. But what feels like abandonment is actually initiation. It is your soul quietly preparing to enter a new stage where you no longer depend on anyone to carry you. Today we walk through that journey, the 7 steps that show you how to rise even when no one is by your side. Not by pretending you're strong, not by forcing optimism, but by discovering the hidden power that has been inside you from the beginning. Because everything you've been chasing in the outer world, strength, love, peace, validation, has always been within, waiting for you to stop running long enough to hear it. And when you finally awaken that inner world, something shifts. You don't just rise, you begin to walk with your own light. Number 1, loneliness, the silent teacher of strength. There are moments in your life when the world seems to pull away from you. People you once laughed with begin to feel distant. Conversations you once enjoyed feel shallow. You show up the same way, same job, same routines, same responsibilities. But something inside you whispers that you're no longer the same person. Something is changing beneath the surface, and it feels like no one else can see it. Most people fear this stage. They interpret the fading connections as rejection or loss. But Jung understood it differently. He called it the night sea journey, the beginning of the dark night of the soul. It is the moment when your inner world expands so much that the life you once lived no longer fits. You have not lost your way. You have outgrown it. Loneliness, in Jung's sense, is not the absence of people around you. It's the feeling of being disconnected from what no longer resonates with your soul. You still smile. You still interact. But something essential inside you has gone quiet, waiting for you to notice it. The language the world speaks no longer matches your own. And so you are left with yourself, not as punishment, but as initiation. Many mistake this emotional distance for failure. They think, if no one understands me, something must be wrong. But the truth is the opposite. When you feel no one understands you, it is often because you are getting closer to your authentic self. The persona, the mask you wore to fit in, begins to fall away. And beneath that mask is the person you were always meant to become. Jung believed that true maturity begins when you dare to face yourself in solitude. Not when someone listens, not when someone comforts you, but when the external world goes quiet enough for your inner voice to finally be heard. That's when the real meeting with the self begins. And that meeting never happens in a crowd. It happens in silence. This is the stage where many people run. They distract themselves with relationships, with work, with entertainment, anything to avoid confronting what the emptiness is trying to reveal. But the more you avoid loneliness, the more it grows. It follows you from room to room, asking for your attention, not to hurt you, but to teach you something vital. Your foundation has been built on external noise, and now it must be rebuilt from within. I once knew a woman who went through a devastating divorce. Her life, once filled with laughter and crowded dinners, suddenly became unbearably quiet. At first, she filled her evenings with meaningless plans, trying to avoid the silence. But eventually, she stopped running. She allowed herself to sit alone. She cooked for herself, read books she once ignored, wrote down the questions she feared, and slowly, day by day, learned to hear her own thoughts again. Months later, she said something I'll never forget. Silence is no longer my enemy. It's where I finally hear myself. That is the moment Jung called the meeting with the self. The moment loneliness stops being a threat and becomes a companion. Because when there's no one left to lean on, you learn to stand differently, more consciously, more deliberately. Each step becomes a choice. Each choice becomes a promise. And each promise becomes a brick that builds inner strength. Loneliness doesn't weaken you. It forges you. It's the winter of the soul, the season where nothing blooms on the surface, but roots grow deeper beneath. Think of the oak tree standing in cold winds, stripped of leaves, looking lifeless. But during that winter, the oak is not dying. It's preparing. Humans are no different. Every lonely chapter is the groundwork for a rebirth you haven't yet seen. Jung once wrote, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." So if you are standing in the darkness of loneliness, don't fear it. Don't rush it. Don't numb it. It is not the end of your story. It is the rearranging of it. It is the dissolution that precedes rebirth. Somewhere inside that silence, a quiet voice prepares to whisper something life-changing. It's time to rise. And once you've passed through the first layer of loneliness and begun to understand its purpose, a new challenge emerges. One far more subtle, far more difficult to confront. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, woven into the small disappointments and unspoken expectations you carry. It is the realization that the world cannot soothe the ache inside you, that no matter how much love you receive, no matter how attentive someone is, the emptiness within you cannot be fully filled by another human being. This is the second step of rising when no one is by your side. Stop seeking emotional comfort from others. Not because people don't care, not because relationships are meaningless, but because there is a place inside you that only you can enter. Only you can heal. Only you can hold. Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter most." And he was right. What exhausts the soul is not isolation. It's the hope that someone else will rescue us from it. You begin to see this clearly when the silence of others starts triggering the old wounds you never realized were still alive. When someone doesn't text back fast enough, when a friend doesn't show the enthusiasm you hoped for, when you open your heart and no one knows how to receive it. These small moments feel enormous when you're emotionally dependent. They echo something deeper, something ancient. Am I still worthy when no one is responding to me? I once met a woman in a group therapy session who confessed that she checked her phone more than 100 times a day, terrified each time her boyfriend didn't respond. She said, "When he goes quiet, I feel like I disappear. But through her healing process, she discovered the silence wasn't about him. It was a reflection of a childhood where no one listened, where her emotions were dismissed as exaggerations or burdens. Her unconscious learned to lie. Your feelings are too much, so you must earn the right to be seen. This is what Jung called emotional projection. We take our old pain and stretch it across the people in our present. We expect them to fix what they never broke. But they cannot carry that weight. No one can. At some point, you must decide to stop handing your emotional survival to others. Self-soothing is not emotional detachment. It's emotional maturity. It's learning to sit with your own fear, your own sadness, your own longing, and whisper, "I'm here. I'm listening." It's the moment you stop outsourcing your healing and begin reclaiming the parts of you that were abandoned long ago. The world teaches us to seek comfort, reassurance, validation. But the soul seeks something deeper: sovereignty. A person who can soothe themselves doesn't crumble when relationships shift. They don't unravel when someone withdraws affection. They don't fall apart when attention fades. They know that their emotions are theirs to hold, theirs to understand, theirs to heal. This doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop needing them to regulate your inner world. Imagine sitting alone in a cafe. Your phone is silent. No one is waiting for you. No one is checking on you. But instead of feeling forgotten, you feel anchored. You sip your drink slowly, the world moving gently around you. And for once, you feel full. Not because someone filled you, but because you finally stopped emptying yourself. This is emotional independence. And emotional independence is freedom. Jung said that all forms of dependence are the shadow of love. We call it attachment, but underneath it is fear. The fear that without someone else's attention, we will collapse. But what appears as emptiness is actually an invitation, a doorway, a chance to become the parent you needed, the guide you longed for, the comfort you were missing. Once you realize no one else is responsible for the stability inside you, something unlocks. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop panicking at silence. You stop begging for emotional presence from people who cannot give what they don't have. Because suddenly your worth is no longer negotiable. And when you no longer need someone to prove your value, your relationships evolve. You begin to love from choice rather than desperation. You begin to speak honestly rather than fearfully. You begin to walk away from what drains you without feeling guilty. One of the most powerful shifts occurs when you understand that someone else's lack of comfort doesn't mean you are unworthy. It simply means the responsibility is yours. And that realization is the beginning of wholeness. There's a quiet confidence that forms when you stop depending on others to soothe your emotions. A confidence that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't cling. It simply exists like a steady heartbeat. You become someone who can sit with discomfort without collapsing. Someone who can hold sadness without drowning in it. Someone who can experience fear and still move forward. This is the foundation of individuation, becoming an autonomous self rather than a fragmented one shaped by the needs of others. Perhaps that's why Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Because when you stop seeking emotional rescue from others, the person who rises is not the wounded child waiting for approval, but the adult who finally chooses themselves. And if you're in that stage now, feeling unsupported, misunderstood, unseen, understand this: your soul is maturing. The moment you stop asking, "Who will comfort me?" you begin asking, "How can I comfort myself?" And that shift marks the beginning of real strength. If you're watching this now, I want you to type one word in the comments: still. Still here, still growing, still choosing yourself. Because even if no one stands beside you, you are learning the most powerful truth of all. you will not abandon yourself again. Once you begin learning how to soothe yourself and rely less on emotional reassurance from others, another shift begins to unfold. One that forces you to confront a habit woven so subtly into your life that you rarely notice it happening. It slips into your conversations, shapes your thoughts, and quietly influences the story you tell yourself about your life. It is the habit of complaining. Most people believe complaining is just venting, a release of pressure, a way to cope. But on a deeper level, it is something far more dangerous. Complaining is the language of the victim ego, the part of you that wants to hold on to the story of why you are powerless. It is the part that wants to stay where you are because movement feels frightening. Complaining gives you the illusion of action, while keeping you firmly stuck in place. And yet it feels so natural, so justified, especially when life feels heavy, when loneliness sharpens your senses, when your heart is tired. But Jung understood that every time you repeat a complaint, you reinforce a narrative of helplessness inside you. You strengthen the belief that life is happening to you, not through you. Complaints begin innocently. I'm tired. No one understands me. I'm trying so hard and nothing is working. But each sentence becomes a thread you weave into a larger story. The story of why you cannot change. The truth is, complaining is not a release. It is an anchor. It holds you in the same emotional place day after day, preventing you from seeing the choices hidden beneath the discomfort. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Complaining is one of the clearest signs that the unconscious is running the show, because behind every complaint is a buried emotion you haven't yet examined. Fear, disappointment, shame, grief. And until you address the root, you will keep finding new reasons to repeat the same story. I once spoke to a woman who spent 6 months telling everyone about how her closest friends had betrayed her. She told the story with passion, with pain, with certainty. But the moment she finished venting, she felt emptier than before. One day, she sat alone and wrote in her journal, "If no one were around to listen, would I still tell this story?" The answer was no. Not because the hurt wasn't real, but because the story kept her tied to the moment she was wounded. It gave her no room to become anything other than a person who had been wronged. That night, she wrote something new. What if this pain isn't here to be talked about, but to be transformed? That was the moment she stepped out of the victim ego. Not because the betrayal disappeared, but because she chose to stop retelling it as proof of her defeat and began seeing it as material for her rebirth. Complaining is often disguised grief, unprocessed disappointment, expectations that didn't unfold the way we wanted. But when you turn that emotion inward and ask, "What can I do with this?" something miraculous happens. Your energy shifts. Instead of circulating inside the wound, it begins flowing into the future. The victim ego is always searching for someone to blame, someone to fix the pain, someone to validate the suffering. But none of that leads to transformation. Change begins the moment you stop pointing outward and begin looking inward. Think of a river flowing rapidly over a stone. The current pushes, scrapes, erodes. At first, the stone seems doomed to be worn down, but over time, the pressure polishes it, smoothing its edges, turning it into something more refined. Life does this to us, not to destroy us, but to shape us. Complaining is the moment you freeze in the current and insist the river must stop flowing. But the river will not stop. It will not pause for your story. And the longer you resist, the harsher the water feels. But if you allow the current to move through you, if you release the need to protest and begin to observe, something begins to soften. You grow. The moment you stop complaining, you reclaim your power. You stop negotiating with the past and start negotiating with the future. You begin asking different questions. Not why me, but where is this taking me? Not who hurt me, but what is this teaching me? Not when will this end, but how do I rise through this? That single shift in language becomes a shift in consciousness. Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Complaining chains you to what happened. Action moves you toward who you are becoming. This doesn't mean you suppress your pain. It means you stop constructing your identity around it. You can still feel sadness, confusion, frustration. But instead of feeding it with repetition, you turn it into fuel. Every step you take becomes a quiet affirmation. I am not a victim. I am a participant in my own evolution. There is a particular strength that emerges when you choose to stop complaining in seasons of loneliness. When no one is watching, no one listening, no one validating, you have only yourself. And that is the perfect moment to rewrite the script. Because you are no longer performing your pain for others. You are facing it honestly, without an audience. Think of metal in a forge. Heat doesn't weaken it, it strengthens it. It burns away impurities, shapes the edges, prepares the material for its next form. Complaining shields you from the fire, but it also prevents transformation. When you step into the heat willingly, you discover that the pain you feared is actually the place where your strength is born. Complaining makes the world small. Action makes it wide again. And once you realize this, you begin to rise differently. Not through external support, but through internal decision. You stop waiting for a perfect moment. You stop hoping someone else will fix what's broken. You stop believing that your suffering must be validated for it to matter. You begin to say, even if no one understands this, I will rise from it. And that decision changes everything. Because the moment you stop repeating the story of limitation, you make space for a different story to unfold. Somewhere deep inside you, a new voice emerges. Steady, grounded, quiet, but powerful. It says, I choose to become something more than what tried to break me. And when that voice awakens, you begin walking in a new direction, one step at a time, guided not by pain, but by potential. As you stop feeding the victim ego with complaint and begin to act from a place of responsibility, something unexpected begins to happen. You rise, but you rise quietly. You begin showing up for yourself in ways you never have before. You make decisions from a deeper center. You carry yourself differently, and yet no one seems to notice. This is the stage that breaks the majority of people. Not the loneliness, not the lack of support, not the silence of life, but the absence of witnesses. You improve, you grow, you change, you give effort that no one sees, and the world remains unmoved. This is where the true test appears. Can you keep going when your work is invisible? For Jung, this moment was essential. He believed that the self cannot emerge when it is driven by the desire to be admired, praised, or celebrated. The self grows only in the presence of truth, not validation. And truth often unfolds in silence. You may find yourself working late into the night, building something meaningful, healing wounds no one else knows about, disciplining yourself in ways that feel almost invisible. You become stronger, wiser, calmer. Yet the world keeps offering you the same indifference it always has. It is here that many people collapse emotionally, not because they lack strength, but because they relied on recognition to keep that strength alive. If no one praises you, the ego whispers, why are you still trying? If no one acknowledges your effort, it asks, what's the point? If no one witnesses your progress, it insists your work is meaningless. But this is a misunderstanding. Silence isn't a verdict, it's a mirror. And that mirror reflects a question the ego fears most. Can you validate yourself? External validation is fragile. It fades quickly. A compliment lasts for seconds. Praise lasts for minutes. Applause lasts for moments. But your own acknowledgement, your own recognition can ground you for a lifetime. I once knew a woman who was the backbone of her workplace. She stayed late, fixed what others overlooked, carried responsibilities silently. She didn't complain. She simply did the work. Yet every time awards were given, someone else's name was called. When promotions came around, she was passed over. When her colleagues were praised, she stood quietly in the background, unseen. One evening, she told me, "It's like I'm invisible." Then, after a pause, she added something profound. But maybe that invisibility is the real test. Maybe I don't need to be seen to see myself. From that point forward, she began to change. Not her output, but her focus. She no longer worked for recognition. She worked because it aligned with who she wanted to be. She began celebrating her own progress, writing down wins, acknowledging her growth, rewarding herself in small yet meaningful ways. She became her own witness. Months later, something shifted. Her presence became grounded, calm, powerful. Not because others finally saw her, but because she finally saw herself. This is the transformation. Jung described the shift from living in the eyes of others to living in the truth of your inner being. To validate yourself means to accept your own light fully. It means recognizing that your worth is inherent, not conditional. It means understanding your value even when no one applauds. Because applause is merely sound. But self-recognition is resonance. Many people fear accepting their own greatness because they confuse it with arrogance. But self-validation isn't arrogance, it is honesty. Arrogance is pretending to be more than you are. Self-recognition is seeing yourself clearly, including your imperfections, your strengths, your shadows. When you validate yourself, you no longer shrink to make others comfortable. You no longer hide your achievements out of fear of judgment. You no longer wait for someone to notice you, so you can finally believe you matter. You begin to see yourself the way your soul has always seen you. Whole, becoming, evolving. Jung once said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." This is because when you accept your full self, light and shadow, you are no longer wounded by external indifference. Validation becomes an internal flame rather than an external spark. People often think that what motivates high achievers is talent, intelligence, or passion. But deeper than all of that is the quiet conviction: I do not need anyone's permission to grow. Your journey becomes sacred when it is no longer dependent on applause. When you validate yourself, you stop chasing rooms that won't welcome you. You stop begging for approval from people who cannot understand your path. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into a world you were meant to outgrow. You become someone whose worth isn't measured by how many people see you, but by how deeply you see yourself. Imagine a lighthouse on a stormy night. It does not flicker brighter when ships approach, nor dim when the sea is empty. It shines because shining is its nature. Whether someone sees it or not, it fulfills its purpose. And because it stands firm, those who need it eventually find their way by its light. Humans carry a similar purpose. You are not here to prove yourself. You are here to express yourself. You are not here to be admired. You are here to become authentic. You are not here to be seen by the world. You are here to see yourself clearly enough that the world feels your presence without you needing to announce it. Self-validation shifts your energy so dramatically that people who once overlooked you suddenly feel your steadiness. They may not say anything, but something in your presence changes the room. Not because you're louder, but because you're anchored. External validation is sugar, sweet but fleeting. Self-validation is nourishment, quiet but sustaining. Each time you tell yourself, "I'm proud of how far I've come," you reinforce your inner strength. Each time you give yourself credit for small victories, you rewire your mind. Each time you choose your truth over the need to please others, you deepen your roots. And when your roots deepen, no silence can uproot you. If this resonates with you, if you've ever kept going without being seen, hit like on this video. Not for me, but for yourself. It is your signal to the universe. I am ready to be my own source of light. And once you learn to validate yourself, to stand firm in your truth, even when the world is silent, life presents you with another test. A test that strips away the illusions of safety and forces you to confront the last remnants of fear within you. It is the test of failure. Failure doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes as a quiet disappointment, a plan that didn't unfold, a risk that didn't pay off, a moment where you believed you had healed only to find yourself triggered again. It arrives in the familiar sting of an old wound, in the collapse of something you thought was stable, in the realization that the path forward is not as smooth as you hoped it would be. But failure, in its deepest truth, is not about loss. It is about revelation. It reveals the parts of you that were still fragile. It reveals the attachments you didn't know you still had. It reveals the fears you thought you had buried. When you fall, you come face to face with the shadow, the unhealed parts of your psyche that still tug at your spirit. Jung believed that the shadow is not the enemy, it is the doorway. Every time life knocks you down, it is not punishing you, it is illuminating something inside you that is ready to be integrated. That is why strong people are not those who never fall, but those who rise quickly. Not because they are unaffected, but because they understand that failure is fire, and fire transforms everything it touches. I once knew a woman who built a small business from nothing. She poured years of her life into it, believing wholeheartedly in what she created. But a betrayal from her co-founder shattered her progress overnight. She lost money, stability, and confidence. For months, she lived in the echoes of that collapse, feeling ashamed and uncertain. One day, during a counseling session, her therapist asked her a simple question. If this isn't the end, but the teaching, what is it teaching you? She sat in silence for a long time, then whispered, "Maybe I never trusted my own intuition." Maybe the fall wasn't punishment. It was direction. From that point on, she shifted her approach. She stopped replaying what went wrong and began documenting what she was learning. She wrote down every insight, every emotional trigger, every small improvement. She treated each mistake not as evidence of her inadequacy, but as a message from her deeper self. A year later, she rebuilt her business. Smaller, but stronger, smarter, more grounded. She said, "I'm not afraid to fall anymore. Every fall makes me more honest with myself." This is how failure becomes fire. It burns away the illusions. It burns away ego. It burns away false certainty. And in that burning, it reveals your essence. From a psychological perspective, failure activates the part of the brain responsible for detecting discrepancies between what you expect and what actually occurred. If you freeze in fear, your body floods with cortisol, the hormone that keeps you stuck. But if you take even one small action, your brain releases dopamine, hope, momentum, renewal. Action rewires the mind. Regret paralyzes it. Think of the phoenix, a creature that rises only by allowing itself to burn first. Its rebirth is not despite the flames, but because of them. Humans mirror this myth more than we realize. To grow, you must shed what no longer aligns with who you're becoming. And often, the only way to shed those layers is through moments that feel like collapse. Jung wrote, There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Meaning, awakening does not happen in comfort. Comfort preserves the old self. Pain awakens the new one. In every failure, you have two choices. You can say, "This is who I am now," and remain trapped in that moment. Or you can say, "This is where I rise from and be reborn." Each rise expands you. Each rise deepens you. Each rise reveals a version of you that fear cannot control. And after all the falls, after you've learned to stand alone, soothe yourself, stop complaining, validate your own worth, and rise from the ashes, life presents you with the final and most liberating lesson. You don't need anyone to understand you. Everything you seek is within. This realization dawns slowly, quietly. It appears in moments when you share your truth and someone dismisses it, when you express your dreams and someone misunderstands them, when you speak from your soul and the world responds with confusion or indifference. At first, this hurts. You want to explain yourself. You want someone to witness the depth of your transformation. You want someone to recognize the battles you fought in silence. But eventually you discover that the need to be understood comes from an old wound. The desire for external confirmation that your inner world is real. But your inner world does not need witnesses to exist. Your truth does not need an audience to matter. Your journey does not need approval to be valid. Jung wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart," meaning the clarity you seek is inward, not outward. Understanding yourself is infinitely more important than being understood by others. Imagine a young painter who spends years creating art that conforms to trends, hoping for acceptance. Eventually, she burns out. Nothing feels authentic, so she leaves everything behind, moves to a small lakeside cottage, and paints alone, without an audience, without pressure, without expectation. For the first time, she paints what her soul wants to say. When she returns to the city, a gallery owner sees her new work by accident and offers her a show. She says, "When I stopped trying to be seen, people finally saw me." This is the paradox. When you stop seeking the world begins to seek you. Not because you chased understanding, but because you embodied authenticity. You become like a lighthouse, steady, glowing, unconcerned with who notices. A lighthouse doesn't lean toward the waves or chase after passing vessels. It simply remains rooted in its purpose. By standing firm, it becomes a beacon for those who are ready to see it. True liberation begins the moment you stop seeking external validation for your path. When you release the weight of explanation, you finally break your chains. You no longer need to audition for a place in someone else's life. Nor do you fear the silence of your own company. In that stillness, you find your way back to who you were meant to be. The affection you once chased in others begins to bloom within you. Peace stops being a pursuit and becomes your natural state. That resilience you hoped someone would hand to you is now the very rhythm of your pulse. This is how you ascend, even when the path is solitary. Growth isn't about being untouchable. It's about being authentic. It's not the absence of shadows, but the courage to step through them. You don't need the world to witness your progress, as long as you are finally witnessing yourself. If these words have stirred something deep within, pass them forward. Somewhere, someone is navigating a storm and needs to be reminded that they have the power to endure, even in the quiet, even in the mist, even in the dark. Consider subscribing today. Do it as a promise to the version of you that is still evolving, still waking up, and still choosing to be guided by their own inner fire. You possess a depth of strength you haven't even tapped into yet. This is only the opening chapter.